Thanks for coming, everybody, to tonight's talk about the U.S. involvement in the Israeli occupation of Palestine. What we're going to have tonight is two speakers going into the details about the U.S. involvement in the occupation. Our other events that we've had so far are focused on various different aspects of the history of the occupation, coming from the mandate moving forward. And then we really felt like we needed to have an event that focused on why people in the United States specifically need to do something about what's going on and kind of flesh out how the U.S. is involved with that. So without babbling too much further, we'll have our two speakers, and then we'll have a little bit of time afterwards for a Q&A and commentary on that. So Krista is going to be our first presenter.
Tonight I'm going to be speaking to you about U.S. military aid to Israel. So just to give you a little bit of information regarding this. Starting off, most of this data you can retrieve yourself if you're interested. Congressional Research Service is a really good reference point for this kind of information. The U.S. military aid to Israel began in 1962. And in the past 54 years, military aid from the U.S. has exceeded $100 billion. Now, the U.S. did give some money before, starting in 49, but it wasn't specific to military usage. So it started in 62 being specific to military usage. And that $1 billion amount is specific to military usage, too. The amount of money exceeds that when you combine other funds, or other means, other reasons. I can speak, I swear. That being said, in 2007, the Bush administration and the Israeli government agreed to a 10-year, $30 billion military aid package. Currently, the U.S. provides Israel $10.2 million in military aid each day. During fiscal year 2015, the U.S. government gave $3.1 billion in direct bilateral military aid. And additionally, the U.S. government provided $619.8 million for the joint U.S.-Israeli missile defense programs, and that's making the total military aid to Israel $3.7 billion for the fiscal year 2015. Israel receives the largest amount of foreign military aid given by the U.S. For fiscal year 2015, it was approximately 53% of total U.S. foreign military financing globally. And at present, the Israeli government is requesting an extension to the current military grants that expire in 2018. So that's coming up pretty soon. Last year, the request for the future annual aid was $5 billion. So there's still negotiations going on with this. And between the U.S. and Israeli governments, they're negotiating that between $4 billion and $4.5 billion is what Israel is requesting. The U.S. officials are offering a slightly lower figure at this point at $3.7 billion. It's still in negotiation. So, and approximately 26% of U.S. military aid to Israel is used to purchase equipment from Israeli manufacturers. No other recipient of U.S. military aid is granted such a benefit. This serves as an indirect subsidy to the Israeli arms industry, helping to make it one of the largest arms industries in the world. I believe it's ranked number 7 at this point. And yeah, the Israeli arms industry is not the only one that's being subsidized, however. Keep this in mind. Through U.S. policies with Israel, U.S. corporations also benefit by foreign military financing, which is transferred to Israel, and the Israelis then turn right back around in the companies like Raytheon and Boeing and Lockheed Martin, Caterpillar, and all kinds of other organizations. They purchase items from them for the military arsenal. Some examples of these companies, what they sell to Israel is Raytheon, right? They supply air-to-surface missiles. That's for their F-16s. That's the whole fleet that they have there in Israel, as well as cluster bombs. Boeing manufactures all sorts of planes for the Israeli military, such as the F-18 and the F-14 fighters. And Lockheed Martin supplies fighter jets such as the F-35, that's a brand new one that's being built specifically for Israel, and they're now aging out F-15s and the F-16s. They even have research development centers in Tel Aviv and in Beersheba. Caterpillar supplies bulldozers and earth-moving equipment to the Israeli military that are used for urban warfare, destroying Palestinian homes, orchards, olive groves, and water cisterns. And that's one of the biggest things to keep in mind, right? You don't even access to clean water because of Caterpillar taking these down or allowing, supplying Caterpillar products to do so. Weaponized bulldozers are also specifically made for Israel and are used to clear the way for ground troops. But unfortunately, over the years, the attacks against Palestinian people by the Israeli military are so numerous that it would be so difficult for me to be able to give a summary of that right now. Hopefully some of you all got to see some of it in our previous teach-ins. There's recordings that you can reference that if you need further information. So instead of trying to summarize all that, what I'll do instead is give just an example of what U.S. taxpayers helped to fund in the occupation of Palestine. In the summer of 2014, the war on Gaza, or as Israel called it, Operation Protective Edge, the Israeli military killed more than 2,250 Palestinians, approximately 2/3 of whom were civilians, including 550 children. In contrast, 66 Israeli soldiers were killed, 66 Israeli soldiers, along with 6 civilians. 92% of the people killed by Palestinian militants were soldiers. This is all based on UN figures. Everyone can look this up. So what I would right now would like to do is do a call to action, right? You just heard how much we're spending here as Americans to fund the occupation and the brutalization of the Palestinian people. How could we spend that money in our country? Well, how else could we possibly use that, right? $30 billion of military aid to Israel? Just the kind of things we could fund with that. It's baffling, right? What I'd like us to do as citizens or as people that live here in this country is to put pressure upon the US government, the organizations that are helping to occupy Palestine. Because if you take away US aid, military aid specifically, there's no way you can occupy Palestine. They can't do it. So we're in the belly of the beast. We can actually make a difference here. We can actually make a change. So if you all would like to step up, get involved here with us with the Save Palestine Coalition, side of sheets over here. But in addition to that, we have to make sure that at the ballot box we're doing it. We have to be putting pressure on our congressional members, our presidential candidates, and obviously the system can be problematic. It's made to make money off of our biggest export, which is weapons in this country. So we may be needing to shake up the system a little bit more than just the ballot box. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Bill up to present his portion.
Here I am. This is actually the second teach-in here. I'm in the audience. But in any case, this is where all my stuff is. That's my place where I have, I think, 22 or 23 different articles on Palestine. So let's skip to the good stuff. So here's the economic aid. And there are two things to look at here. One of them is the size of Israel in terms of the economic aid. The other one is the per capita income. So here we have $30,000 or more GDP per capita. The GDP, we're talking about GDP here. Now you see a lot of money going here, but there are a lot of poor people. So this is the super first world power. This is like a military laboratory for the United States military. And you can see where we are here with Gaza, and then Egypt. And then you go out, just pretty much the whole picture is of economic connections, of tie-ins is right there. Okay, I'll bring this thing in because we're talking the prison industrial complex and the military industrial complex are all parts of the same things, of the same thing. This is the core of the American economy, are these two aspects. And it involves essentially slavery, which is what you have in Palestine. Okay, so here we have two images. The climate in Palestine essentially is the same as California. So when you look at pictures of undeveloped areas in California, you've seen that kind of thing, what it looks like. And then you see this kind of stuff going on. And this is also, as Krista mentioned, they're taking water from the Palestinians. So in the first place, here they were at the Mediterranean in a place that looks like, it's a beautiful place. And it was stolen, actually it's like it was pulled out from under them, essentially is what happened. And then you're left with stuff like this. So you can imagine standing back as an impoverished Palestinian who maybe just had their friends and maybe they're waiting to be shot themselves, because you can do it at will. And that 97, 98, 99, something like that percent of people who are brought before military courts are convicted. So you don't have any rights at all. You're a Palestinian, you're much worse than nothing. And the racism is incredibly intense in that country. Okay, so here we are. This one here, this Cuba, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and the Philippines. So we go back quite a way economically in terms of being a military industrial power. And Mark Twain talked about the Philippines. He was disgusted by the whole thing going on there. Alrighty. The negotiating point from the Oslo Accords was, the Oslo Accords are a sham. What they had done is essentially make a Palestinian's life completely under the control of any of the military. And you see them with all their, just decked up with all this gear. And at any point, you shoot someone, no one's going to do anything about it. There's going to be no retribution. Nothing's going to come down on you. So in the Oslo Accord, what they did is they gave a small negotiating point, which was to label the products that came from the West Bank and put it on the label as having made there. So we have made in Palestine, this is what it should be. The whole area was that. It was you might as well say you flipped a coin to declare the state of Israel in 1948. As a Palestine, the mandate, the British were leaving. So it was like a sleight of hand, is the way I like to put it. And so we got the difference between what is the law and then what they can get away with. It's like when in the Trail of Tears, where the Supreme Court judge for the Cherokee people, and then Jackson said, well, I'll try to enforce this. So it's what actually happens. It's the de facto situation that counts. Okay, here we're going to talk about real estate and God not being a real estate agent. I think maybe people have seen this. If you haven't, you're seeing it now. And this reads, what do Israel and ISIS have in common? Each have hijacked a peaceful religion for support and furthering brutal and inhumane political ideologies. So you say, oh, this was 3,000 years ago. God gave this land to me. And so you're supposed to say, okay, let me leave my home at this time. I'll take my keys with me and I'll go on into exile, which is essentially what happened. All of these cities, the names were changed. They went in and wiped out people in many cases, or 700,000 went into exile. So here they were right along the Mediterranean, and they were pushed in, but then that's enough. That's not enough. We want to have everything. We want to have it all. Okay. So here we are having a boycott, and boycotts do work, and they do work when you hear the word, you hear BDS, and you get people pretty nervous in Israel, people who are pro-Israeli. Yeah. They know it works, so what they have to do is just pretend it does not. It's really very much like living in the Matrix, I think is what it is. In fact, we have an author coming into Cincinnati in May. The name is Jeff Halper. And he wrote a book called War Against the People. And he talks in there about it, the people really are, they have blinders on. They have an idea that what is happening, but they don't know what really occurs. And they're right next to them. I mean, most Israelis have never been anywhere in the occupied territories. Not to mention thinking Israel is an occupied territory itself. Okay, so there are dominoes heading for the watchtower there, and that looks a lot like the Berlin Wall too, except it's twice as high as the Berlin Wall and has far more. And it's like a laboratory deal here where they're trying out all these security systems. They have really a sweetheart deal with HP where they're trying out, what they're doing is like having everybody walking around with an RFID chip. And it's essentially getting to that point. It's like they're doing, well, essentially people, it's the way we want to put, maybe we'll tattoo a number on them or something. And they don't even make the connection that that's been done someplace else before. Okay. Wow, I'm actually down to my last slide, I think it is here. And this gives you the aspect of how people have this insular feeling. They have a feeling of there is no place other than the United States, and everybody has to relate to us. And I was living in Germany for a couple of years, and they would, talking to soldiers over there, we talk about being back in the world. And that meant being back in the United States. And so you had this whole feeling, this stuff that's coming up now with Trump, and it ties right in, I think, with the way that the people are, the way that the Palestinians are being treated. There's a thing that just came across as I was putting this thing together that is called Canary Mission. And what it is a means, but you can spy, or you have a grudge with one of your neighbors, and you can turn them in. So it's essentially it's McCarthyism, but they don't see anything wrong with that. What's the problem with that? We have people who are threatening us. This is the whole Hasbara thing. Hasbara is a Hebrew word which means to explain, and what it essentially is, it's propaganda, and it's all part of the Matrix too, where you have an alternate reality, and the alternate reality you think is the real reality. And meanwhile, all these things are going on. And they can do it at a whim. Like if you want to set up a checkpoint, all you have to do is have a couple soldiers come along and say, here's a checkpoint right here. And now I'm going to go ahead and checkpoint you. I'm going to go over here, I'm not going to checkpoint this person, but there's someone else I want to checkpoint over here. So it comes down to where there's complete and total control of these people who were living the same place. They're living there. It's like, what do you do with all of the Palestinians who are not, as the Native Americans were, conveniently disappeared? So the ethnic cleansing is essentially what has to happen. Or what? What is the alternative? And by taking, and in the West Bank, you form all these little cells, and then you have these roads that can only be used by Israeli citizens. And you're looking out at that, and you're seeing like that thing with the picture of the California type situation where the kids are on the slide and all this wonderful stuff is going on. You're looking at that, and you've had your house destroyed. You've had arsonists come in who are brought in, who are, I think they're deliberately chosen to, well, anyway, that's my whole talk, I think. So thank you very much for your patience.
Okay, so we've had two presenters go over some of the broader aspects of the U.S. involvement in the occupation. Right now what we're facing is a wave of legislation that would actually seek to make it illegal to boycott or divest from Israel. And there's actually a bill right now in Ohio with that aim. As insane as that sounds, like that's what is trying to get passed into law right now. So it's something to think about. We're definitely in talks with other people across the state working against this initiative. But what we like to do is to open up for questions, comments, further information about what was presented or maybe what wasn't presented tonight, and just kind of get a feel for where we're at. Sure.
So is it currently the case where it's illegal for state groups to divest, and they want to make it so that no one can divest? Or is it coming up for state? Because I thought there was something about state organizations that couldn't divest.
I think right now, no bill has been passed in Ohio, so currently, right now, it's legal for anybody to divest or boycott, including the state. I think what the bill would do is say that if a company divests from Israel, then it would no longer be allowed to have any contracts with the state of Ohio. So it wouldn't be illegal for them to do that, but they would never then they wouldn't be able to do any business through contract work with Ohio.
Over the last month, students at Ohio State University have been working tirelessly to educate their campus about the struggle for justice in Palestine and demand that the university divest from corporations complicit in Israel, the Israeli occupation and apartheid. Just 2 days before the student government was set to vote on the divestment resolution, Ohio legislators sent a public letter to Ohio State student government leaders claiming the student campaign breeds discrimination and hate and pressuring student reps to vote against divestment. Representative Joyce Beatty was the only Democrat to sign the letter targeting students, and she's also the co-sponsor of the unconstitutional H.R. 4514, the so-called Combating BDS Act of 2016, which is what you're speaking of. It was an outrageous interference in campus politics by Representative Joyce Beatty, and we need to fight back. They're calling, tell Representative Joyce Beatty that Jews and allies standing for justice, human rights, and divestment. We won't allow our movement to be silenced. So they have an Ohio campaign going right now to try to work on that exact issue.
What about the Republicans?
The rest of them were Republicans.
I think that was referencing a bill that's before the U.S. Congress. There's also a bill called the anti-BDS bill, I think, that's before U.S., that's going to come up in the U.S. Congress. And I'm not sure what that will, I don't know what the content of that bill is in terms of making BDS hard to do. But there's state level bills and there's a national level bill. And I think that was referring to the national bill.
Well, they say it's House Bill 476 in Ohio,
Okay.
aiming to silence our free speech and pressuring us to support campaigns to divest from corporations complicit in Israeli human rights and
Okay,
abuses.
that's
So,
right.
aimed at silencing people.
There's also one in the U.S.
I thought that was in reference to the Committee for Justice in Palestine at The Ohio State University trying to get the university from divesting.
Right.
The student government was going to vote, and then the state House representatives called and tried to influence the student government vote.
Interfere with the university.
To interfere with the university vote, yes. So that was, I think, what the letter from the Committee for Justice in Palestine student group was about. But they did mention that this woman, this representative, was probably one of the people that involved in the bill, the state house as well.
I was wondering if you could, or someone could talk a little bit about the relationship between the United States and Israel at the UN.
I mean, I think that you could quickly say that anything that Israel wants to have not put forth through or put through the UN, the U.S. is going to vote with Israel and always has historically, pretty much vice versa. But perhaps someone could speak a little bit more in detail.
I'm not going to speak in detail, I'm going to give my opinion. I believe our foreign policy is completely controlled in Israel. So everything that we do as Americans on foreign policy, especially in the Middle East, is for the stabilization and the propping up of the Israeli state. So I believe our wars in Iraq, I believe what's going on in Syria, what happened in Lebanon, in Libya, what happened in Egypt with the Arab Spring, I believe that was all to prop up Israel. You can't have a strong Israel if you have a strong Iraq. You can't have a strong Israel if you have a strong Egypt, a strong Libya, a strong Syria, in Iran and the Saudi Arabia that are getting along. You can't have a secure Israel. So we have historically always voted or shot down anything that would put the state of Israel in any kind of bad light. As soon as something goes to the UN Security Council, we have shot it down instantaneously and we've not gone any further. We invaded Iraq for Saddam Hussein being a violation of 2 UN resolutions. Israel sets a violation of 63 UN resolutions today. So we are 100% going to support Israel as a policy of this country, even if it's to our detriment. There was a Catholic priest who said, everyone always says, Israel's our only friend in the region, but I can't recall us having any enemies before that. So this is a very true statement of what we've decided to do as foreign policy. But I wasn't full of any facts, just my rant.
Perhaps I can add to that a little bit, and then I see some other hands too. Maybe to give one example, and I guess I would preface by saying that I disagree slightly with the last comment, in that I think the interests between the two countries, the United States and Israel, do overlap somewhat. And in that regard, you see these actions and support diplomatically and economically and militarily, like we've been talking about, from the U.S. to the Israeli government. But I don't think that 100% of the time they always overlap. And I think there's cases where the United States has tugged on the leash a little bit, so to speak. The Sinai Peninsula, I think, would be one of the examples of that. But as far as a good kind of case study to look at, if you want to think about how the United Nations fits into this, would be the 2008-2009 assault on Gaza, Operation Cast Lead, which happened kind of right before Barack Obama was the acting president. He'd been elected, but he hadn't taken the helm yet, so to speak. And what happened in that, what they called military operation, which was really basically a one-sided war against the people in Gaza, was an all-out pre-planned military operation in which over 1,000 civilians died. The numbers are sketchy and hard to pin down exactly, but there was an investigation that went along with this by the United Nations called the Goldstone Report. And the Goldstone Report found that civilian infrastructure was directly targeted, so water, sewage treatments were hit with missiles at the exact angle outside of a conflict zone. There was no conflict there. Was hit at the exact angle that sewage would come out and flood all the agricultural fields. Bulldozers were used to flatten chicken farms. And there aren't a lot of these things in Gaza that weren't in the conflict zone, to destroy the cement factories, and on and on and on and on and on, which are war crimes. You're not allowed to do these things, not to mention, directly bombing civilian areas. So this all came out in this UN report. But as many people have mentioned, what happens with these things is then the United States plays their card where they get to say, we're not going to do anything about this. We're not going to implement any resolution to this. And then what ends up happening later on is that there's a huge attack on the person who authored the report, Goldstone, who ends up coming out with an op-ed months later, recanting it, but not really recanting the findings of the report in any detail. And I think that's a good example because that's, I think, indicative of what we've seen again and again and again and again and again. But there were some other hands up too. Did you have another comment?
No, you answered that.
I have a question. Can somebody talk about why the United States sees Israel as such an important ally in that part of the world? What is it about Israel, or what is it about our connection there that we give them so much money and expend so much political capital to protect Israel?
It's like no one of these politics people, the government will be elected unless AIPAC and all who's there are voting them in. They are controlling everything. So the system here, like every 4 years, we elect the same people, the one who's known there, they're approved there in Washington, not the people of you and me and whoever around. So every 4 years they vote them again and again and again. That's the democracy. Some of them they die about 80 years and they're still going. Every year they win, or every election they win. By who? I don't think the people educated enough here to think about it. If they choose in Washington, these people are not going, if you don't do this, you're not going to be back there. So they do it. I don't know what to say more than that. That's what I feel. They are controlling the governments, not the people. The people who make the laws. Yes. To support Israel, to support whoever, it's made there.
I think the reason why the U.S. continues to support Israel in the Middle East, and it's not just Israel. Israel acts as their arm in the region because the region is very resource rich and it's very strategic militarily and economically. So it actually is to some extent in the U.S.'s interest to support Israel as it has with dictators in the region. That's my take on it.
Yeah, and to kind of piggyback off of what he just said, actually I believe that our relationship with Israel is the way it is because of the economic invested interests that the Jewish community has in the United States, and that they have a very strong hold economically in America. And a lot of times we don't want to accept it, but the economics is really a major thing when it comes to politics. And it comes to people's invested interest in things. And as long as they control the media here in the United States, they control you know, a lot of the behind-the-scenes political operations, then naturally they're going to want the United States to support any action that would happen over in the Middle East, as far as, you know, the Jewish interests are concerned. They're going to support that. That's my opinion.
I don't know much about the specifics here, but I know that the common mythos about why we support Israel is linked to, you know, us supposedly, you know, contributing to the victory of the Allied powers in World War II, and that, at least in the mindset of a lot of people I've talked to, Israel was like the Jewish victory. Like they, I mean, it wasn't directly linked to that historically, but they believed that Israel was like the Jewish victory in World War II. And basically, if you go against, the idea that I've heard again and again is that if you go against Israel, then you're going to be labeled as a Nazi or anti-Jewish, or, I mean, clearly that doesn't have a lot to do with this. We're talking politics, not religion here, but that's what I've heard as to why we support Israel in the, just the mythos behind it.
You, sir, actually said pretty much what I was going to say. But yeah, I think it's multi-tiered, or multi-pronged rather. That it's definitely about resources, and the region is resource rich, and you can look at it as basically a grand military base for the U.S., you know? It's a means to be able to control the region. If you've got heavy weaponry and a government that's willing to go and do whatever you're okay with too, it's going to serve to your purposes. And also, let's keep in mind that this is on the Mediterranean, you know, that's great access to a port. So once you are able to get the resources, you have a means to get the resources out of there too. You need to have that Mediterranean access. So it behooves the U.S. capitalists to occupy Palestine, you know.
I think it's a very complicated issue, the relation between Israel and the U.S. government, and multidimensional. Some part of it is economic, some part is policy, some part of it is cultural. One of the reasons I think is the history. Actually, the Western culture attitude to the Jewish in the history, and especially in the World War II, make a public guilt for Western culture. And Zionist movement used this sense of guilt as a tool to, as a leverage to gain power in US, in Europe, and make a country in the Middle East. One of the reasons I think is the cultural history, what happened in the history. And one of the other view I think is the economy, because capitalist system has been built based on strong financial and very complicated financial institutes. And most of these institutes are controlled by Zionist supporters. Because in the U.S., I'm telling you, because Jewish in U.S., based on the polls and any articles are supporting more liberal part of the economy in U.S. But the interest of Zionist movement is the opposite of the most Jewish people, Jewish in the U.S. I think these two aspects is one of the hundreds of different aspects that make this complicated problem.
I don't know if this is answering the question, but I feel like there's so much in American history that almost makes it okay to justify what's going on in Palestine, where we still celebrate Columbus Day, we still celebrate the massacre of the indigenous people in this land. So it doesn't feel wrong to do it somewhere else. I recently came back from Jerusalem. It was one of the most spiritual experiences I've ever been through, but I've also never had a gun pointed at me before. And I, like, looking at that experience, I feel like on some level, and I really appreciate having the Black Lives Matter, and Palestine collaborating on things, and I was walking through, I had that experience, and I came out and I was like, okay, that's what it means to be Black in America. We've treated people in this country exactly the same way for so long that why wouldn't we just say, oh, it's okay if it happens again over there. We've done it. We're okay. There's nothing wrong with us.
The question was posed, why does the United States have a special relationship with the state of Israel? But I would pose a different question, which is why does the United States fail to support the plight of the Palestinian people? And that question, I think, is very, like you're saying, very much down to these, the systems of oppression that we've already seen in this country, and it's very easy for us to shift that same kind of thinking right onto Palestinian people, and so we talk about the many dimensions of this issue, economic, political, cultural, but I think that what needs to be a part of this conversation is that there's certainly an element of the whiteness of the Israeli people as to why people in the United States are so readily able to identify with them, and so find it difficult to identify with Palestinian people sometimes. So it's a very technical issue. We talked a lot about funding today and money, but it is also a significant cultural issue, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Great, and so that's going to be our last comment, and exactly. And just thank you to the Clifton Mosque for hosting us again, and Jen for making the wonderful food.
Thank you.
For everyone as well.